Good morning, everyone. We're going to take a look at the book of Revelation, and I'm going to go through just a few of the slides and try to comment on them, and I hope that will be helpful for you. The first slide is basically an overview about the book of Revelation. The word revelation comes from the Greek apocalypse, meaning to unveil or to pull back the covers. It's an interesting term, and I think there's something hidden about the message. That seems to be kind of an overview sense about the book itself. And so our effort is to pull back the covers and try to discover what it is that John is telling us. So what we have discovered is that the revelation actually comes from God. It is God who informs Jesus, and then Jesus informs the seer, and then the seer informs John, the author of this text. And we know that it's somebody by the name of John because in two different instances throughout the text, I think in chapter 1 and also in chapter 22, the author makes reference to himself as John. And so that's so the message is ultimately from God through these various channels until it comes to us, the reader, basically. We're not quite sure who John is. There's always been all kinds of speculation about the author of this particular text. Some have thought it was John the Apostle, one of the 12 apostles. Others thought it possibly was John, the author of the fourth gospel, or even the author of the three letters. But the writing style and the theme and the theology is so different from these others that it's pretty much somebody else. And probably it's someone from the school of John. And I suspect it's probably somebody of some note, most likely a bishop, because he seems to know the parishioners and the members of the seven churches off the coast there of Asia Minor. John's writing from basically from prison, from the island of Patmos, which at that time was a prison. I think today it stands as a kind of a tourist attraction, but it's just about a mile and a half off the coast of Asia Minor, which is present-day Turkey. I think I mentioned that to you in class at one time. Yeah, this little map gives you some sense of the seven churches. You can see the church at Sardis and Smyrna, the church at Philadelphia, the church at Ephesus. And then if you'll notice the map closely, I placed a little X. That approximately is where the island of Patmos is. At that time was a prison. Especially it held those who were revolutionaries and those who were opposing the government, because at this time the Roman governor had declared just one religion for the empire, and he declared himself a god, and therefore any other religion was outlawed. And it seems that the members of the seven churches that John is writing to were still holding on to their young Christian faith. They're obviously Jewish members that converted to the Christian faith, and always keeping in mind that Jesus himself was always a good and a faithful Jew. And so we oftentimes think that Jesus came and threw out the Old Testament and started something new. That's not the case at all. He always remains a faithful Jew. And these members of the seven churches of Asia Minor were versed in their history and the theology of their Hebrew traditions. There's no question about it. And they've also been very much influenced by Greek philosophy and Greek mythology, since it was very pervasive at this time. So that's what we have in the book of Revelation, a mixture of many of these symbolic references to the Hebrew faith as well as to the Greek philosophy and mythology. So John is writing to his community, encouraging them to stay faithful to their new faith, and not to give in, even though it was very costly, because we have a civil record suggesting that those who would violated the new command of one religion were subject to imprisonment, to even death, to the loss of all their property, of all their owning. So it was a kind of a scary time for the young Christians at this time. I wanted to also point out to you that it's kind of interesting. The book itself, in some ways, sort of takes us on a journey. We begin on Earth with the here and the now, and then it takes us on a kind of a circular journey that we meet and encounter various confrontations and conflicts. We encounter on this journey the four horsemen of the apocalypse, for example. We also encounter the vicious struggle between the dragon and the lamb. If you can imagine such a contrast, this monstrous dragon sort of about to devour this gentle little lamb. And again, they're all very symbolic. The same thing as we circle into the high heavens above. We have the dragon about to devour the child of the woman that we find was about to give birth to her son. And the dragon is there ready to devour the son. And then it takes us all the way through around until we come back to Earth once again. And so try to keep that in mind as you're reading through the book of Revelation. This is kind of a journey. If you imagine yourself on a chariot being taken into these heavenly bodies and all of these amazing sort of conflicts and the surprises that we meet on the way, and then we come back again. So the book itself sort of concludes. We're back to Earth again, and to reality, and the hope and the promise of the future. This next slide is essentially an overview of the text itself. As I say, we had the introduction, and then the first four chapters. Basically, we see these letters, the 7 letters that John sends to each one of the churches. And it's really, I think I gave you an assignment to select a couple of those letters to get a sense of what John was trying to tell, and what he was trying to encourage the particular parishioners of these parishes. Now, in some ways, your study is as good as anybody else's, because the book of Revelation is, in fact, an encounter with so much that's unknown, and there's people are trying to figure out what was John really trying to say. But it's interesting to read the letters that he sent to these communities, because you do get a sense that he knew them very intimately. He knew about individuals in the community, some of their shortcomings and their failings. There is, I think it's the community at Philadelphia that he seems to praise, because they've been faithful, and they've stayed faithful to the faith, and they have been, and I think what he seems to encourage, the importance of charity amongst the community, and patience and compassion and understanding. That is so really important. And at the same time, it's pretty clear that John despises the emperor and the empire and everything it stands for, because he sees his people as victims of this sort of monstrous, he calls them all kinds of sort of nasty names, as it were. So then we go through, and then we have the 7 seals the four horsemen of the apocalypse, the trumpets, the dragons, and the lamb. So we have all these various sort of encounters on this circular journey that we're taken on as we read through the book of Revelation. And then also the epilogue sort of concludes. And what seems to be prominent is that there will be just 144,000 that will be saved, and the rest will sort of be thrown into the fiery lake, the lake that is consumed with fire. But and so John is hopeful that the faithful will be amongst the 144,000, and that numbers, as you might know by now, are very important. They are very symbolic, and they oftentimes mean something. So, and I think that number 12 is a reference to the 12 tribes of Israel, and perhaps the 12 apostles, and times 1,000 gives you the 144,000. It works out that way. So numbers are important because they tell us something. Just like the number 7 is the number that indicates perfection and completion, and so we encounter the number 7 oftentimes throughout. I do have a list that I'm going to try to send to you that has pretty much all of the symbols and all of the references, and that if I can manage to send that on to you, I'll talk to Brother Damian Joseph, and he'll help us get that to you, so at least you have a sense of something to look at when you're reading the book itself. The purpose of the book itself is always concerned with the development of history. It's about the future and how the future is going to be, how it's going to conclude. That's pretty much the aim of the text. It seems to focus ahead, and we uncover the mysteries of the future. And at the same time, obviously, John is comforting, especially the victims of this crisis. And that would be the members of the 7 churches. These 7 churches of Asia Minor were not particularly large. I'm sort of guessing at this, but it would seem to me there probably would be just a matter of several families at one time living in these places, and so maybe each parish might have had anywhere from 30 to maybe 40 members. And these places were originally cultic temples, pagan temples, that the parishes now have settled in. The early Christians settled in these 7 parishes. And again, the book itself is always an attempt to describe a perfect environment that's to come, and as well as providing assurance that God is with God's people, and that they're to remain, comforted by that fact. It's essentially a faith message of hope for those that are suffering. I just wanted to make. You'll notice on your screen you have 2 references from Revelation 19 and Revelation 21. I just wanted to read that very brief, those brief passages from 21 that gives you a sense of this future and the culmination at the end of the world, what it would be like according to John. He says, there'll be a new heaven and a new earth. He said, then I saw, as in his vision, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The former heaven and the former earth had passed away, and the sea was no longer. I also saw a new Jerusalem, the holy city, coming down out of heaven from God, beautiful as a bride, prepared to meet her husband. I heard a loud voice from the throne cry out, this is God's dwelling among men. He shall dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and he shall be their God, who is always with them. As you can see, there's that constant reassurance to those that were suffering. He shall wipe away every tear from their eye, and there shall be no more death or mourning, crying out or pain, for the former world has passed away. So that, in some way, sort of summarizes the text itself. That it's a text that takes us on this journey with the hope of the future that's going to come. One of the interesting stops on the journey is the encounter with the woman and the dragon. And you can see here in this image that John's notion was that the woman is about to give birth, and the dragon, you can see that's not there's numerous paintings and sort of descriptions of this image that we read about the woman and the dragon. She's about to give birth, and then the dragon will devour the child. But what's interesting, if you look at this picture particularly, I think those of you who might happen to be Catholic would say, aha, that looks very much like the Blessed Mother, who's standing on this sort of monstrous dragon. And it is true. I think the Catholic Church has adopted that image. That what John was talking about was that the woman that was about to give birth was the Blessed Mother, and she, when it would be her son, that is the child Jesus, that would bring ultimately this peace. But it seems more likely that the woman is essentially the Hebrew image of the nation itself. The woman is the image of the Hebrew nation, and that the child that she's about to give birth to is actually the young Christian community. So you can see there is obviously a connection between the Hebrew and the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition. You can't have one without the other. You can't separate them. They're all part of one. So my sense is that that's what that woman represented. Was she represented the nation of Israel, and that the dragon is essentially the Roman Empire, and in particular the monstrous emperor himself. And so as you read the details of those passages about the woman fleeing away, and the dragon being duped, and the child being rescued and saved, again, is a sense of hope and a sense of promise. So I'm going to just sort of wrap things up for this particular session. And I think if you have any questions or concerns, don't hesitate to send me a note, or to Brother Damien Joseph, and we'll both be very, very happy to respond to you in any way we have. And I think you also have your homework assignments, and you can actually start working on those. And if you haven't already started, you can start turning them in on Saturday. And then I think there was, I gave you a set of very brief questions, and I asked you to respond to a couple of them. So if you could do that, that would be really great. If you could send them to me, I'll be very happy to read them, and I'll get back to you as well. Okay? Thanks. Bye-bye.